So the first thing is that I do want to thank Yossi Friedman, who is joining us today. This is the middle of the day in New York, as you know, 3:30. This is somebody who has a regular job in addition to his volunteer job. So Yossi Friedman is one of the coordinators that runs the Hatzalah Ambulance Service of Crown Heights, which is a volunteer emergency medical service organization. And he's been doing this for over 20 years. He volunteers his time alongside 60 other highly trained medical professionals. And what they do is they respond to medical emergencies in the community 24/7. So that means on Shabbos as well, at night, midnight, doesn't make a difference what time of the day, with one of the shortest response times anywhere in the world. And we know that when you need 911, they're never fast enough. His training was at St. Vincent's Hospital, a medical center in New York City, and he's also an ordained rabbi. So what I wanted to do is, I know that many of you have read in the news all about the Chassidic neighborhoods in New York hit with the virus tremendously, how they reacted. I know today the good news that we keep seeing is that they are the largest group of plasma donors throughout New York State and probably in the entire United States. But first I want to give you a little bit of a understanding of how Hatzalah, this volunteer ambulance group in the neighborhood of Crown Heights, stepped up to the plate, even as some of their members themselves contracted the virus and weren't able to really help. So what I'm going to do is play a video clip. Hopefully the quality comes through clear. And then after that, we'll have some questions that hopefully Yossi will be able to answer and provide some insights. So here is the video. And just bear with me.
Do we have any CH units available for Montgomery and Albany?
Any units in Crown Heights for Maple and Kingston for a 65-year-old severe diff breather?
Reality started sinking in that this is something much more serious than anyone had thought.
And we're literally just going from one call to the next. And I remember there was one afternoon, it just was absolute chaos.
Are there any CH units available for Lefferts and Albany for a patient with a low O2 sat?
For a patient possibly not breathing, do we have any units heading to Maple and Kingston? Put a rush aid response. Any medical?
It was emotional for them. Like, they were tearing up, they were crying. I mean, these were their friends, their family members.
First and foremost, the Eberster, thank you. Secondly, Hatzalah.
Part of the healing is the support you feel, and when you see people really care, it just makes all of the difference.
Any units in Crown Heights for Crown and Troy for a 78-year-old?
HBase calling Crown Heights 904. What is your ETA back to the Crown Heights area? You're the only bus available. Please try to put a rush on it.
We were the first neighborhood where there was widespread community dissemination of the disease. I asked the Hatzalah coordinators to call all the members to a meeting, which we did on the phone, preparing the members for the onslaught that was about to occur and trying to make some rules of engagement as regards what was about to happen.
The normal Hatzalah volume in Crown Heights is about 7-8 calls a day. As the pandemic hit, that started to increase until it reached a point where it was 10 times the normal call volumes. Hatzalah of Crown Heights was just being hit with call after call after call with no respite. So we took the dispatching from normal Hatzalah dispatchers and started to dispatch from Crown Heights itself. And I think we did a very good job with that.
Calls were coming in fast and furious.
I remember just driving down the streets of Crown Heights, going from one call to the next, and literally just every block you saw members' cars, double parked with their lights flashing, and it was like a real realization of what we were going through at that moment.
Couldn't get air in my lungs and feeling complete short of breath. My wife and I decided we should call Hatzalah, and that was really the first part of intervention of Hatzalah with my situation.
Even though they were not critically ill, these were patients that had just begun with the illness. This was now in a different situation where Hatzalah members were being asked by the hospitals not to bring the patients to the hospital, and therefore we had to develop a way to make sure that patients were safe. Hatzalah members played an incredible and a critical role in maintaining the well-being of patients at home
Much of the time, we were working with a staff that was reduced by perhaps 50% in many cases. A lot of the stuff that we use in a typical period would last perhaps 6 months was flying off the shelves in 24 hours.
When our own members started going down too, and they started needing Hatzalah, and they started getting transported to the hospital, that's when I think it really just hit home, how bad the situation was.
When my health deteriorated, it was decided that it would be better that I go to the hospital. And they made sure that I was transported in time so that it wouldn't become a riskier transport.
About an hour after I got home, there was a ring on our doorbell. A beautiful young man came in with an oxygen machine and a pulse oximeter from Hatzalah. And he's like, we just want to make sure it's here in case you need it.
Members went and essentially carried out the function of a army of nurses making sure that all patients were okay of the Yomim Tovim.
I had a visit from my private Hatzalah member that lives down the block. He would come in, check me out, make sure everything is okay. Baruch Hashem, I kept on getting stronger and better, and by the time Yom Tov came to an end, I was released from their care, and they moved on to help other people.
All I can say is that Hatzalah was wonderful.
We were actually really glad that we got him that he left the hospital and he was able to be treated at home, and Hatzalah was there, set him up with oxygen, whatever he needed, and kind of made a little hospital for him and took care of him as if he were in a hospital.
Getting follow-ups and really caring. It's not just an ambulance service. It's beyond that. It's real Bikkur Cholim in the ultimate.
Over Pesach, I did a lot of the house calls to a lot of patients that were recovering from COVID or patients that were in the middle of COVID, and I was able to, in a way, give them that chizuk that, I went through it, Baruch Hashem, I got better, and I'm back on my feet, I'm back being able to help other people.
Just people are willing to do whatever it takes to help one another. You just really see the achdus, and it's just mind-blowing.
The Hatzalah members themselves, impossible to describe how incredible they were to just jump in there and do what was needed, not seeing their family sometimes for the entire day, not eating, not davening. It was just something to behold, incredible.
I definitely feel like all the wives in Hatzalah really deserve tons of credit for doing what they did, and you're running out all the time, so there's no break. She's really was really on her own.
It made me just incredibly proud to be a part of this incredible organization.
Being a patient and being a caregiver, I can say that I'm really proud to be a member of the community and lucky to have the Hatzalah members that took care of me. I'm really proud to be a Hatzalah member, to be able to take care of the other members of the community.
There is absolutely nothing in the world better than having a friend like Hatzalah.
Come partner with us, invest in the infrastructure of Hatzalah, equipment, supplies, so that we're even better prepared to deal with situations, medical emergencies in the community. God willing, never something on this scale, but it certainly taught us that we can be even better prepared.
We don't do it for thanks. We never do. But to see how much people cared and the support, even on just a purely, emotional level, was an incredible thing to see. Thank you to the community for your support and encouragement. Whatever we were able to do, we were only able to do because of you guys.
So with this backdrop, and as you and I know how difficult it is to watch a loved one or ourselves go through any medical illness and definitely require an ambulance or transport the unknown, you can imagine how comforting it is to have someone from your own community who shows up and is there for you in your time of need. I know that when my own grandfather passed away, I was there, and it wasn't some random EMS or 911 that came. You have people from your own community. That video, I'll just share a little bit about where the video was produced for, and then once Yossi Friedman's camera is back on well, we'll be able to ask him some questions. So the most important thing I think that I took away from that video was you had a community, and this was, of course, not unique just to the Crown Heights community. This was happening everywhere. But you had a community that was going through a tremendous strain on the infrastructure of medical support, not just in the sense of the emergency medical services of the ambulances and first responders. But as you saw in the video, the hospitals were over, they couldn't take any more people. And here they stepped up, not just as an ambulance service and triage and first aid, but they actually became the nurses. They were checking in on patients who were at home needing that service. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to ask some basic questions about Hatzalah just so we can all get a better understanding of it. And then I'll ask some questions specific to the coronavirus and how they dealt with it, why they were so successful, and just to get some better understanding. So I'm going to ask just the basic questions of Yossi Friedman, and you'll tell me if you can, do you hear me well, Yossi? I know he's
Sorry for the technical difficulties. Firstly, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be joining you. I heard a whole bunch of questions, and where was the last one before we got disconnected?
Well, I figured the first question really that is why and how did Hatzalah begin? Not necessarily the Crown Heights one, but the concept that you have a Jewish emergency response unit. So if you could share a little bit of the history of it, and then.
Sure. Okay, so first, I mean, we're talking about 35 years ago, approximately. The first neighborhood that had a Hatzalah was really poor. I'm not just talking about New York. We're talking about professional emergency medical services were in its infancy. You had people driving in a hearse with an oxygen tank, and that's really what it amounted to. There was nothing close to the professional response you have today. Now add to that people that came didn't speak the language, so the EMS providers were trying to communicate in English, and the Chassidim were trying to answer in Yiddish, and it became a whole balagan. So I think, and the delayed response and all that, of course, didn't help as well. So that's when it started, and from there, I think Crown Heights, we were actually second, not me personally. Obviously, we're talking about a long time ago when I was still a kid. But I heard the account from Rabbi Bistritsky personally, how he and his father went into Williamsburg and met with the head of Hatzalah of Williamsburg. And so as I was saying, that Crown Heights came second after Williamsburg started out and had the first Hatzalah. And since that time, EMS across the country has improved and become much more efficient and much more professional. And you might say that Hatzalah is less critical now than it was way back then. But nevertheless, I think here in New York City, EMS, the fire department, responds on an average 7 or 8 minutes response time to the most critical calls. As you could well imagine, for somebody who's choking or in cardiac arrest, 7, 8 minutes is just way too long. So we have the advantage of being able. I think I'm back. I say we have the advantage here of being able to respond from within the community. Oftentimes within a minute or two, I've had people tell me they called Hatzalah, and before they hung up the phone with the operator taking the call information, we were at their door, ringing the doorbell and responding. So literally, a 2-minute, 3-minute response time is very average for us. And for someone who's in a really critical condition, such as a choking or a cardiac arrest, when every minute counts, literally You can imagine that that's just really, really important.
So just to recap, because I know some people got lost the beginning of your words about how Hatzalah began. So if you heard what he mentioned was that there was really just a need within the community, and it wasn't an organized way. It was just people carried oxygen tanks and whatever vehicles they had, and responded if they knew a neighbor or someone else needed something. They were much quicker than waiting for an ambulance to actually roll up. And then it just grew from there. So I think the original story, which Yossi probably mentioned, but we all missed it, was a person actually died because of the lack of a response, and they felt that if they would have just had an oxygen tank, they could have saved this person from a heart attack, if I understood correctly. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's literally way back at the very beginning of when Hatzalah started here. And like I was starting to say, and I got interrupted, I apologize. I'm not sure why we have such a difficult connection. But it has come to a point where EMS in New York City is reasonably professional. When you call 911, and I imagine where you are, it's much the same. You do get a professional response, either emergency medical. If someone is choking, someone's in cardiac arrest, that's just too slow. It's just going to be too late. So if I'm able to respond from down the block and dislodge that object that's obstructing somebody's airway, save a.
Okay, perfect. All right, so going to, I think that the answer that you shared about why did it begin and why it's still relevant is very clear. I think I know that for us, we do programs specifically with seniors, and I remember one December 24th, we had a movie night with Chinese, which is a custom for Jews, and we had someone who collapsed at the dinner, and even though she was fine, the ambulance that came was probably 10 minutes later, and no one was comfortable with the response times. And that's exactly what you're saying. The idea is there's nothing that compares to having somebody who lives in the neighborhood or might work 3 doors down, who gets dispatched with the radio and comes and can really provide some life-saving methods or technique. So the next question that people are wondering is, do you answer calls from non-Jews? And if the answer is yes, why are they calling you?
Excellent question. I mean, I guess the answer is obvious. If somebody calls us for help, we're obviously going to help them. That goes without saying. Where they find us, it might be different types of scenarios. You might have someone who was a nurse taking care of somebody, and you know, they were told by the family, if you ever need an ambulance, please call this number. And they've probably seen, you know, what the response is when 911 shows up quite a bit later, and when Hatzalah comes really quickly. That's probably the most common scenario. Someone who has just seen what we do happen to have that number, and just take, you know, using that opportunity, and certainly we will respond and do our best to take care of any human being who's suffering, either ill or injured, of course.
Okay, thank you. So on that note, what is your relationship with the 911 New York City Emergency Medical Services? Do they frown upon you, or do they appreciate that you supplement or complement their services?
I think the initial, you know, the start of it was probably a little bit difficult, and I know in some places where Hatzalah continues to create new divisions, and they start out in the local EMS is a little bit skeptical and can be difficult sometimes to develop a relationship. I think we've been very lucky though in New York City, where we've just really settled into the point that they accept us as professionals. They realize that at this point we're simply covering actually tens of thousands of calls in the entire New York City. Our operation at this point is over 1,200 responders across New York City. So I think they realized that they would just have an impossible time trying to keep up if without us. So I think they appreciate at this point what we do, and we've sort of, we've become allies, if you will.
So a segue question from that, which was asked in the chat, and I'll make sure to get to those questions afterwards, but I thought it's connected to that. Someone asked if we have it in Phoenix, which I told them already no, but I mentioned that I do know that in certain cities or countries throughout the United States and the world, they don't provide the same opportunity in the sense of the local government to even begin or start their own Hatzalah ambulance or response. Is that unique to New York, or what? Do you know what other cities and countries have it properly set up?
So listen, wherever you are, it's going to take some time to develop a relationship with the local government and the local responding agencies. And like I said, here it's been a long time already, and it took time and meetings and lots of effort. And eventually they came to appreciate what we do. And I think the same is true wherever someone tries to start out. It's going to be difficult at first. You're going to be looked at as, intruding on our turf, so to speak. And you may be there may be some rejection, and some of the agencies or responders or officers may not be happy with the idea. But if you keep persevering and you keep showing them that you're genuine and that you really want to help, in most cases, with time, you can get you can break through the ice. And I think that's what happened here in New York City. And then I started to respond upstate in the Catskills, and it took another 10 years before the locals were willing to accept us, and the state police and the local fire departments and others. And then here in where I work, in New Jersey where I work, and it took another 10 years, so it's a slow process. But eventually, I think if you're sincere, then you'll be successful.
That's interesting. I didn't realize New Jersey has it as well. So that's something that isn't.
Absolutely.
So now I do want to move on to sort of the video itself, because really, we do these Zooms. Originally, we were doing it every single day, and then we moved it to 3 times a week. And it was always brought to my attention. I mean, I was seeing the same articles, but someone always would point out how the Jewish community in the Chassidic Brooklyn, as de Blasio, the mayor, would like to point out the problems. So I do want to talk about the corona part, which is really something everyone was reading in the news, sadly, internationally. So first of all, the video speaks tremendously. How did it affect you specifically and personally? And then as an organization, something that you can add maybe to the video, the difficulties in the sense, I noticed you mentioned even supplies just flying off the shelves. We all know about the personal protective equipment that was so difficult to purchase. How did you resupply? And in general, if you can just talk a little bit more about that time.
Honestly, the whole probably 2-month period when it was really maybe 6 weeks when it was really at its peak is all one big blur, I must say. It started off with the struggle to get masks and gloves and like PPE, as you call it, personal protective equipment. We quickly realized, as things started to intensify, that we need every single Hatzalah member needs a new thermometer. Every single member needed pulse oximeters to measure people's oxygen levels. And we initially kept being told, just like everybody else, the rest of the world was told, it's going to be just like the flu. It's going to be no big deal. It's going to be okay. We stocked up reasonably in anticipation. And I remember that, the first Friday before we really started to get hit, and I went to each of our ambulances. We have 5 ambulances covering the Crown Heights area, and made sure that there's sufficient supply of masks and gloves and gowns, which we always have, but you might use it once a month or so for a suspected meningitis case or a suspected measles. To expect that within a day or two we're going to be needing those supplies on every single patient encounter, and that's, by the way, how it's been up until this very moment. We still go into every single patient, with masks and gloves in just in case. But that was just not something anyone in their greatest, with the greatest imagination was prepared for. On an average day, I would say Hatzalah of Crown Heights fields 7 or 8 different emergencies, ranging from, a kid who falls off a monkey bar, to an older patient with a pneumonia, to a chest pain, a car accident, just a diverse mix of all types of emergencies. And then all of a sudden, from that approximately a week after Purim, I would say, the call volume started to intensify, and then all you heard was COVID calls. To this day, I don't know what happened to all those kids who usually fall or cut themselves or get hurt. There was nothing else. It was all COVID all the time. It was unreal. There was virtually no other call. And we start to get these calls, and it would come in as a patient not feeling well or a patient with shortness of breath, and you just knew what it was, and you gowned up and you went in and you start to assess these patients. We're blessed to have a brilliant doctor here in the neighborhood from, since certainly in the 20 years that I'm here, over 20 years that I'm here, Dr. Eli Rosen has been at the...
Interrupt for a second. For those of you in Phoenix who know the Melmed Center, which is for children with special needs, I know there are some people on our on the Zoom right now that do. That is his study partner in medical school. So his medical school study partner lives in Phoenix, and many of us know him.
Interesting. I'll try to give him regards.
Spoken about it multiple times.
Anyhow, we started to realize that we can't treat this as we do with every typical call where a patient who's ill. In most cases, we transport them to the hospital and let the hospital try to figure out if they're at high risk or belong at home. And here the hospitals were saying to us, listen, don't bring us the patient unless they're really, really ill and can't be at home. So we realized we need to start assessing these patients more thoroughly at home. And then, hey, in a matter of 6 hours, a patient that appeared to be doing fine and had a good oxygen saturation, meaning they had enough oxygen in their blood, could suddenly decompensate and start going down the tubes. So we realized that we have to start reassessing these patients. So patients that we were at, and we were, sometimes you could tell this person is really just nervous and they're going to be fine. But there were patients who were sick, didn't need to go to the hospital yet, but we had to make up that, listen, in 4 hours from now, we'll be back, we'll recheck your vital signs, we'll check your blood pressure again, listen to your breathing again, check your oxygen saturation again. In most cases, we were in close contact with the patient's doctor, wherever that was practical, feasible. And we just start going from one to the other to the other. And, from the average, like I said before, of 7, 8 calls a day, came to, where it started to be 10 calls a day, and then started to be 20 calls a day, until it reached a point where we were dealing with, 70, 80. And I just have this vivid memory of walking out of a patient's house, and we were using these blue-colored gloves, just happened to be the color that our supplier sent us, and took off those gloves, and I shouldn't maybe say this, but we would just there was so little time to run to the next call that we took off those gloves and dropped them on the floor. And as I looked up and down the block, I was able to literally see this trail of gloves just going from one side of the block to the other corner, and to my right, and the same thing to the left, and virtually, if not every house, every second house had the distinct pair of blue gloves in front. Sometimes it was one of us, sometimes two of us responding to a call, and then often, like I said, we would have to go back, not just be there once, but recheck them until we felt that they were really out of the woods and out of danger. And cases, unfortunately, where they did poorly, and we were worried for their lives, we of course did transport them to the hospital. The local Brooklyn hospitals were completely overwhelmed, so in most cases we were taking them further out to Manhattan. to hospitals in Manhattan. And it was a point where, like I said, we have 5 ambulances. All 5 ambulances were busy. I called on my neighbors from Williamsburg, Hatzalah. Guys, could you send me an extra crew with an ambulance? On the other side, I have Canarsie, another neighborhood. I said to them, guys, can you send me one of your ambulances and your crews? And we had guys just going round the clock from patient to patient. And don't forget, came to a point where some of us, despite our masks and our gloves and our precautions, many of us did eventually get sick and had to be quarantined or were in bed. And then one of our members actually ended up in the hospital in quite serious condition. So it was really a struggle. So we were dealing with sometimes 10 times the call volume and only half of our personnel available to respond because the other half were either sick or quarantined. Really something incredible.
So on that note, I know in the video that there was, of course, the mention how much the wives needed to be thanked. How did your personal Seder look like? Was it disturbed constantly? Did you have a Seder, I should ask?
Okay.
So sorry, the Seder question.
Yeah, so we were going to thank the wives, but I before that even I really wanted to thank the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who in his wisdom way back then had the foresight to really encourage Hatzalah and just at one point I remember the Rebbe saying that we should have an ambulance parked in front of 770 so that when people would come to Shul to daven, they would see the ambulance and it would be a reminder that you need to take care of your health, go to your doctors, take your medicine, and just take care of your health in the best possible way. And the Rebbe really, encouraged and supported us. So I really want to start with that. I know it's the Rebbe's Yahrzeit coming up this week. And then yes, absolutely. Our families, I could never say enough. The Seder itself, for me personally, I must say, I made it through the Seder. I was able to be home for the Seder. I know that's a bit anticlimactic. There were some Hatzalah calls, and some of our members that I know were out during the Seder. I can tell you that much of the rest of Pesach, I was out going from house to house, and basically what happened was even that patients that were at home came to a point where they realized that we were having complications like blood clots and other things that were developing. And so, Dr. Rosen and some of the other doctors in the neighborhood were really getting nervous, and they said, listen, how do these people even know what to look for? You start to get pain in the calves of your feet. That could be something called a DVT, where you're developing clots in the legs, and those can quickly spread up into the lungs, and that indeed happened to many of our patients. So we actually divided up every patient that we knew had COVID, and we have, like I said, 50 or 60 members, and I was on the phone coordinating with the different members, asking them to go to see people that are, in their vicinity, on their block, or live close to them, and just go into them and say to them, how are you feeling? Do you need to have your vital signs checked? And by any chance, are you having any signs of clots forming in your legs or in your lungs from new shortness of breath or something like that? And if yes, obviously they either had to go to the hospital or else they were on the phone with the doctor. Many of them were put on medication called Lovenox that helps dissolve clots. And we certainly lost a lot of patients, unfortunately, but even so, I think we're very grateful for the many patients who really did incredibly well.
So on that note, someone asked in the chat if you have a number of how many people were actually treated by Hatzalah in Crown Heights with coronavirus.
Right. There is a number somewhere. I don't personally have it. I would need a little bit more time to probably in the vicinity of about 1,000 responses, and in some cases that was just a quick check of vital signs. In some cases that was meant being I was by the same patient sometimes 10 days in a row giving them, oxygen and IV infusions and who knows what. So yeah, I think that would be a reasonable guess, although I don't have hard statistics on that.
Would you be allowed to share when your last COVID patient or engagement was?
I would be allowed to, I think, without obviously giving any information and any names. But honestly, I don't know that the last one was necessarily the most exciting one. They're just
No, I
were.
don't mean about this. Meaning how? Because if I understand.
How long ago you mean, time-wise?
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's actually been several weeks since that I know of a clear case or even a strongly suspected case in Crown Heights. I'm really very, very happy to be able to say that. No, that's it's been at least 3 weeks, I would say, since the last confirmed new fresh COVID case in Crown Heights that I know of.
Which is pretty amazing.
That's tremendous news, as there are still many of the older people who have remained sheltered in place, or people that are very vulnerable, and for them that's incredibly important. Absolutely.
Right. I actually explained to everyone around Pesach time that my grandmother had my aunt do the Seder a floor below her with their door open so she could be part of the Seder, but to protect her from even coming close to a possibility of having the virus, I'm going to say, or contracting the virus. So people were very careful. I know that you had mentioned Dr. Rosen. I also had shared with them on here about his many letters or the updates from the community doctors of what to do, how to be safe, and people listened apparently. So it really is amazing what a community does.
Indeed. I did happen to notice on the chat a question from somebody asking about protecting ourselves from liability. Great question. And the answer is we're all volunteer. So none of us are getting paid. As you well know, there are Good Samaritan laws, and it's just, you can sue anybody for any reason, but for that case to actually get off the ground and be able to move forward without a judge throwing it out right at the first hearing, you need to have, a strong case. And in the case of a Good Samaritan, of a volunteer, unless a person is grossly negligent, it'll be very difficult to sue them. Nevertheless, we do carry insurance. We have a umbrella policy covering all the Hatzalah members just in case. But it would be very difficult to sue a volunteer who's just giving from of their time and doing their best to help a person.
Okay, and actually what I want to do, these are great questions. I want to move away from the coronavirus part, at least on our questions, and just, I guess, get basic information about Hatzalah organizations. These are the last questions I'll ask, and then I'll go through the chat. Do all Hatzalah organizations operate the same? In other words, obviously you have your own jurisdiction, but is there sort of an umbrella that says operate this way, or you can't use the name Hatzalah?
Explain the question one more time. I'm sorry, Robert.
Do all of the Hatzalah organizations operate the same? Same infrastructure, same rules of engagement, if you want to call it that.
Okay, got it. So we function under, medical protocols. So, you can't just show up on an emergency and do whatever you want. There certainly are guidelines of the basic steps to take under certain conditions. And nevertheless, it's certainly going to be tailored neighborhood by neighborhood to the specific needs of how far you are from a hospital and how many providers you have available. And, we're fortunate to have 4 physicians in Crown Heights and about 10 paramedics, advanced life support providers who can do IVs and breathing tubes and medications and all kinds of stuff. and the rest are basic life support people, and those different factors are going to influence, how you respond and what you do on calls. But for the most part, you function under general guidelines called protocols, and those are pretty universal for the New York City area. There's Hatzalah now in another probably 50 places besides New York City, and obviously how things are done in England is going to be different to how it's done in Australia and how it's done in Israel and in all different kinds of places. Beloved, I have only 5 more minutes. I have another appointment, so I do need to sort of address whatever questions we have.
All right, we'll do quick questions. First of all, someone asked, what does Hatzalah mean? I'll let you answer that.
Great question. It's a Hebrew word, and it means rescue. I think that's the idea, to provide help and rescue someone either injured or ill.
All right, and then another question. You mentioned that you don't charge for services, so how do you sustain your organization?
So we don't charge. We never even billed insurance, I must say, until this year. It's been strictly donations. People will, just out of the generosity of their heart, will sponsor a new ambulance or equipment, or just write a check for $18 or $1,800 or whatever it is they're able to and want to. Just recently, people start to come and say, hey, this is crazy. We have insurance that covers a trip to the hospital. Why shouldn't you bill that insurance? You're throwing away money. And there was some debate back and forth and back, and ultimately we did agree to do something called soft billing, where if a person has insurance, the insurance company would get a bill, but if someone did not have insurance, we would not bill them or expect any payment from them. That's what we've been trying out right now. But for the most part, it's just donations from the community.
Okay, and I think the one question that was asked privately was, do you get any funding from the state of New York? You mentioned that you really save them a lot of their own calls.
Right. So no, we never went to the state looking for money. In some cases, there were small grants for different specific things they wanted. At one point after 9/11, they decided it would be important for us to have gas masks in case there would ever be an attack with, some type of device with poisonous gases, and then with mass casualty incident or something along those lines, and they donated a bunch of those and things like that. But for the most part, we're self-funded.
I think that's, for me, that's all the questions I have. If there's any question that anyone did not ask, you just want to unmute your mic quickly. If not, we want to let you get back to work. As we've explained, that's really where you are right now. We really appreciate that you took the time to speak with us. I know, Henny, your question, I asked this question to Rabbi Friedman about, she mentioned about Queen 93, I think it's called. She wants to know if they are part of Hatzalah. They are their own umbrella.
Right. No. It's a completely separate entity, separate from Hatzalah.
Yeah, so I shared that with her.
Yeah.
If anyone else has any questions, Stevie, I see you unmuted your mic. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So do you guys do the motorcycle thing or the scooter thing, or is it just ambulances and your private cars?
Right. So that's a fantastic question. The idea was brought up a few times. And the answer is, in New York City, it would just be way too dangerous. I mean, there's only so much. We said before how thankful we are to our wives. There's only so much my wife will tolerate. If I told her I need, to ride a motorcycle or fly a helicopter, I think that would be more than I can expect from her. So. No, we aren't doing it, and I don't think our insurance company would really want to hear of it for any time soon.
All right, so
thank you.
I don't see any. Lou, did you have a question?
I think she's thinking of the company in the volunteers in Israel.
Yes, she is. She wrote that.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, guys, right. It was a pleasure. I really do. I'm thrilled to be able to have been a part of your program, and I wish you all the best and a super healthy and fantastic summer to all of you. Thank you, Rabbi Levertov. Thank you so much for having me.
I'll share the website if anyone wants to learn more about specifically the Crown Heights Hatzalah, and if you wanted to donate to them, as they said,
Thank you.
they rely on that. Thank you again for all of your time. We really appreciate
You
this.
bet. All the best to you.
Take care.
Hatzlacha and a very good Chodesh to you.
Thank you. On that note, so just to
Thank you, Rabbi. It was a great program.
yes, my pleasure. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties, but like